Before life became what it is today, it was a time of constant adjustment, trial, and error. I was always figuring things out as I went along, learning from each misstep and pushing forward with the belief that things would eventually make sense. My journey wasn't one of grand plans, but rather a series of moments that felt like they might lead somewhere meaningful. Some were fleeting distractions, others hard lessons. And through it all, I maintained a drive to succeed and to make something of myself, even if I wasn't entirely sure what that would look like in the end. Everyone called me Jack, though my full name was Jackson Wells. Growing up in a small Ohio town surrounded by endless cornfields, life felt predictable and unchanging. The houses were painted the same dull gray, not by rule, but by tradition. Even the sky seemed to match, especially in autumn when the streets emptied and the few passers-by hurried home, bundled in long coats. Lawns were meticulously trimmed, and any neglect quickly became the talk of the neighborhood. Gossip thrived here. Not malicious, just a genuine curiosity about who bought a new car, whose kid left for college, or who quietly returned after things didn't work out. Life moved at a steady pace, like a script no one dared to rewrite. Most people worked at the same factory or ran family businesses passed down through generations. Sundays were reserved for church, familiar sermons, and leisurely lunches. My family was ordinary. Dad was a mechanic, principled and hardworking, up at dawn every day for breakfast before heading to the shop. He could fix an engine blindfolded. Mom, an accountant, was organized and practical, believing that chaos was more than just clutter. It was a mindset. As a kid, I was easygoing, quick to make friends, and even quicker to avoid trouble. If school had awards for talking your way out of situations, my shelf would have been full. I wasn't a bad student, just uninterested in memorizing facts when I could be playing basketball, tinkering with old cars, or inventing excuses for forgotten homework. Teachers often said I had potential if only I'd focus, though no one ever clarified what I should focus on. By my teens, I'd realized I had a knack for persuasion. It wasn't manipulation, just an ability to frame things in a way that made people agree. When chores came up, I could spin a convincing case about why they could wait while I headed out with friends. That skill later proved useful in jobs, negotiations, and even casual haggling. I wasn't the best-looking guy in school, but confidence carried me further than good looks ever could. Tall, blonde, with blue-gray eyes, I might have fit the bill for a toothpaste ad, if not for my coffee obsession. But charm outweighed appearances, and I leaned into it. Youth passed without major drama, aside from minor misadventures like a failed soda resale business and a botched experiment that nearly wrecked my parents' car. Turns out, butter can't be replaced with cola. Sports, especially basketball, were my real escape, fast-paced, dynamic, and a reminder that teamwork often mattered more than talent. Despite my mischief, I stayed grounded, respecting my parents and steering clear of real trouble. It worked well enough. Though life has a way of testing that balance eventually. Before marriage, life felt like one long experiment. I tried, failed, and tried again, full of confidence but without a clear plan. Success seemed inevitable, though the path was anything but clear. I wanted it all: freedom, recognition, fulfillment. But figuring out how to get there was another challenge. When it came time for college, I chose business and management, figuring it was broad enough to open doors. I didn't anticipate the dull lectures, dry economics exams, and endless presentations. College life itself, though, was anything but boring. I juggled classes, part-time jobs, and side hustles, organizing parties, selling t-shirts with absurd slogans, and even starting a mini event agency with friends. The agency collapsed quickly when I realized how complicated logistics and budgeting could get, but the experience was eye-opening. I had leadership skills, but little patience. I wasn't an honors student, but I knew how to navigate challenges. If a project was due overnight, I found someone to help. If I risked failing a class, I figured out a way to fix it. It wasn't laziness. It was survival. Success, I realized, didn't belong to those who memorized facts, but to those who adapted quickly and found solutions under pressure. By graduation, one thing was clear. I didn't just want a paycheck. I wanted work that felt worthwhile. I explored startups, studied investments, and discovered a surprising passion for marketing and sales. Understanding people, crafting strategies, and negotiating deals came naturally. By the time I finished college, I had practical skills, a few failed ventures, and a core belief that flexibility mattered more than rigid plans. I didn't know what the next step would be, but I was certain of one thing: it wouldn't be dull. The real challenges, I'd soon learn, were still ahead. By the time college rolled around, I'd had my first intimate experience, far from the polished scenes in movies. It was quick, awkward, and forgettable, though my girlfriend back then pretended otherwise. Like most things, practice eventually made it better. College was a time for experimenting, and I gave open relationships a shot. It sounded ideal, freedom without commitment, but I quickly learned I wasn't wired for detachment. Jealousy and overthinking crept in, proving I couldn't separate feelings from fleeting connections. Not all relationships were short-lived. I dated one girl for nearly a year. We spent weekends dreaming about life after graduation, imagining shared futures until she admitted she wanted to explore the world before settling down. I couldn't fault her. We parted without drama, a quiet reminder that sometimes letting go is the right choice. Graduation marked the start of a different life. No more classes, exams, or college parties. Now it was about earning a living, ideally without dreading every morning. I took the first job I could find, sales in a corporate office. It was a soul-sucking routine of identical suits, pointless meetings, and endless coffee. Selling products people didn't want felt like trickery. And I quickly realized the only real skill I was gaining was surviving boredom. The office grind wasn't for me. I needed work that felt meaningful, not just profitable. That's when friends pitched a startup idea in social media marketing. It was perfect timing. Businesses were just waking up to the power of online advertising. We built campaigns, studied consumer behavior, and watched trends shape buying habits. It was fast-paced, challenging, and far more fulfilling than office life. But like many startups, it didn't last. After 2 years, financial struggles and fierce competition forced us to close shop. Once again, I stood at a crossroads, find stability or chase another uncertain opportunity. That's when luck finally tipped in my favor. I landed a job as an international project manager for a major company. It was everything I'd craved. Constant travel, high-stakes negotiations, and the chance to work with people from around the world. Each project sharpened my ability to think on my feet, build connections, and find satisfaction not just in a paycheck, but in progress. Business trips were more than work. They came with moments that broke the monotony. One trip to San Diego stood out, not because of the training itself, but because of who I met there. Her name was Savannah Blaine. Tall, sharp-eyed, and effortlessly confident, she walked into the room like the world was designed to be her backdrop. We met at a bar after the first day of training, exchanging casual banter that quickly turned into an unexpectedly easy conversation. She worked in corporate investments, fluent in reading people, and instantly pegged me as someone more interested in bending rules than following them. That night didn't end at the bar. We wandered along the beach, trading stories and playful arguments. There was something magnetic about her, a rare mix of wit, fearlessness, and self-awareness. I didn't realize then how much she'd challenge my carefully structured life. The next day, she surprised me by leading one of the training sessions, effortlessly commanding the room's attention. Watching her work made it clear. Savannah wasn't just charming. She was sharp, adaptable, and completely in her element. The rest of the training blurred into moments that felt less coincidental with each passing day. Conversations stretched longer, sidelong glances became more frequent, and by the final night it was obvious neither of us saw this as a fleeting conference connection. After the training, we didn't drift back into separate lives. Instead, we found reasons to cross paths, meetings in different cities, events that just happened to align with our schedules. Our calls stretched late into the night. Messages grew less formal, and eventually pretense fell away. It wasn't just casual anymore. We were opposites in many ways. Her life was fluid and spontaneous, while mine was built on structure and planning. Yet being around her made me forget why I'd ever valued control so much. Every new encounter felt like leaning further into uncertainty. But for once, I didn't mind. One night, after another conference, she casually pointed out what we'd both known for a while, that we'd long crossed the line of friendship. I didn't argue. There was no point pretending anymore. From that moment, things moved quickly. We stopped treating our time together as incidental. Whether in new cities or quiet corners of familiar ones, we carved out space for each other, knowing full well we'd already stepped into something neither of us wanted to end. Savannah challenged every rule I'd lived by. Not by pushing, but simply by existing in a way that made control seem irrelevant. It wasn't the kind of relationship defined by clear boundaries or careful planning. It was unpredictable, intense, and, for the first time in a long while, exactly what I didn't know I needed. Conversations faded into silence, replaced by fleeting touches, knowing glances, and quiet laughter. With Savannah, words felt less important than the unspoken understanding that settled between us. The night unfolded naturally, without hesitation or doubt, As if everything was falling into place exactly as it should, we explored each other like pages of a long-awaited book, driven by curiosity and connection. Dawn filtered through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. Savannah stretched lazily, her expression content, as if she already knew this moment was the start of something more. Some call it coincidence. I'd call it perfect timing. When I was offered a promotion in her city, the career perks were secondary. The real reason I accepted was her. Finding an apartment became less about convenience and more about how easily Savannah could make it feel like home. It didn't take long. Her presence transformed the space effortlessly. Life together happened naturally, without formal decisions or second-guessing. Days blurred into a rhythm of shared routines, playful arguments, and spontaneous moments. Routine never had a chance to settle in. Each day felt like a new discovery, driven by an energy that never seemed to fade. The idea of marriage lingered in my mind long before I acted on it. Life with Savannah had already shown me that waiting for the perfect moment was pointless. The decision solidified after one of our trips, sitting by the coast as the lights of distant fishing boats flickered on the horizon. The next morning, I bought a ring, not for a grand proposal, but for something quieter and more personal. On a lazy Sunday, over coffee and sleepy smiles, I asked her to marry me. She accepted with a grin, pretending to weigh her options before giving the only answer we both already knew. Meeting her family was the next milestone. Her father, reserved and skeptical, sized me up with the quiet scrutiny of someone used to protecting what mattered most. Her mother, by contrast, was warm and relentlessly curious, bombarding me with questions about everything from life goals to favorite colors. Her brother, blunt but fair, offered a simple verdict: "I like him," quickly followed by, "But if you hurt her, I'll liquidate you." It was hard to tell if he was joking. Her friends were easier, already familiar with our dynamic. They joked about us finally making it official after countless adventures together. At her office, Savannah introduced me with exaggerated flair, prompting her secretary to mutter, "At least, he looks like he can handle her." Apparently, I'd passed yet another unspoken test. Then there was her boss, Gerald Hayward, a man whose presence filled any room without effort. His handshake was firm, his gaze sharp, and his tone edged with authority. He made it clear I'd stepped into territory where confidence alone wouldn't cut it. "Hope you've got an open bar at the wedding," he quipped, already assuming an invitation. Savannah, unfazed, brushed off his theatrics, clearly used to his dominance. The wedding was exactly what she'd envisioned: an oceanfront villa, golden sunset, and fireworks timed perfectly with our first kiss as husband and wife. Planning it felt less like a chore and more like another chapter in our story. Late-night discussions, endless choices, and the kind of chaos that somehow brought us even closer. The day itself arrived in a blur of soft jazz, flickering candlelight, and the hum of anticipation. Savannah appeared like a vision, her dress flowing like liquid light, hair swept back with effortless elegance. Conversation halted as guests turned to watch her walk down the aisle. Even Gerald, usually quick with a sarcastic remark, stood silent. We skipped traditional vows, opting for promises that felt more like us. Honest, direct, and laced with the humor that had always defined our relationship. Exchanging rings wasn't just ceremonial, it was the quiet confirmation of everything we'd already built together. The reception unfolded like a dream: clinking glasses, laughter, and parents stealing moments to wipe away quiet tears. Naturally, Gerald couldn't resist one final gesture. With a smug grin, he announced a wedding gift from the company: a sleek black convertible, elegant and undeniably fast. Savannah's eyes lit up as she ran her hand along the polished exterior, while I stood there wondering, not for the first time, if I'd made a deal with the devil. But looking at her, radiant, laughing, and entirely herself, I realized something. If this was the ride I'd signed up for, I had no intention of ever getting off. Our honeymoon was everything it should be, an escape from reality. We flew to an island where the world shrank to sun-soaked beaches, quiet waves, and each other. Mornings lingered with breakfast in bed. Afternoons drifted by in long walks, and evenings faded into candlelit dinners. It felt too perfect to worry about anything else. Still, I couldn't shake a lingering thought about Gerald's extravagant gift. Officially, it was from the company, but something about it seemed personal. One evening, watching the sunset from our villa terrace, I brought it up. Savannah brushed off my concerns, chalking it up to Gerald's love for dramatic gestures. Her playful dismissal was enough to push the thought aside, at least for the moment. Married life settled into a rhythm of shared routines and minor quirks. Savannah scattered magazines everywhere. I quietly stacked them. She forgot to turn off lights. I muttered about the electric bill while flipping switches. It was endearing, even amusing, until the little things piled up. Arguments sparked over trivial matters, who'd take out the trash or how towels should be folded. Savannah insisted on rolling them neatly, transforming our linen closet into what looked like a hotel display. I protested at first, but inevitably found myself rolling towels without thinking. A small but definitive loss in our unspoken household battles. Work consumed most of our time. Business trips, deadlines, and late nights at the office became routine. Whenever one of us returned from a trip, though, home felt complete again. Exhausted smiles, tight hugs, and takeout dinners on the couch reminded us that, despite the chaos, we were exactly where we wanted to be. Children weren't in our immediate plans. We agreed that before starting a family, we'd build a stable foundation, careers, savings, and the freedom to provide the best possible future. Parenthood, in our minds, meant sleepless nights, scattered toys, and constant exhaustion. It felt distant, something to consider later when life was more settled. But life rarely follows a script. Amid the usual rush of meetings and deadlines, we found out we were expecting twins. The news hit like a tidal wave, equal parts panic and excitement. True to form, Savannah jumped into planning mode, compiling lists of doctors, budgets, and parenting strategies, while I spent days just trying to grasp the reality of our impending transformation from 2 to 4. Parenthood, unsurprisingly, was nothing like the idealized images in movies. The first months were pure survival, sleepless nights, deciphering cries, and learning to function on caffeine and instinct. We became experts at falling asleep instantly and waking at the faintest sound. Our once organized home turned into a battlefield of diapers, bottles, and pacifiers. But beneath the exhaustion was an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. Despite the demands of parenthood, Savannah's career continued to soar. Promotions, bonuses, and accolades followed one after another. She juggled meetings, school drop-offs, charity events, and family dinners with a seemingly endless reservoir of energy. I often watched in awe, wondering how she stretched 24 hours into what felt like 48. I kept pace in my own way. Early meetings, tight deadlines, and evenings spent catching up on work long after the kids were asleep. Yet, no matter how busy life became, we always carved out moments for each other and the twins. Reading bedtime stories, soothing tantrums, and sharing quiet dinners became the anchors that held everything together. Eventually, all the hard work paid off. We reached a point where dreams once whispered quietly became reality. We bought a house, not just any house, but the one we'd unknowingly imagined all along. Spacious, sunlit, surrounded by a lush garden where apple trees bloomed in spring and leaves turned golden in fall. It wasn't just a house. It was the beginning of the next chapter, the one we hadn't realized we'd been working toward all along. The house quickly became more than just a place to live. It was the heart of our family. The wraparound terrace was perfect for quiet mornings with coffee, wrapped in blankets as we watched the sunrise. Evenings were spent there, the sky painted in soft pinks and oranges, while the distant calls of nightbirds drifted through the air. Inside, the living room was bathed in golden morning light, streaming through tall panoramic windows. Wooden floors gleamed under scattered rays, while large sofas, perpetually covered in toys and books, invited us to sink into them. A towering bookcase held our favorite stories, and in winter, the fireplace crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the room. The kitchen, with its white marble countertops, copper fixtures, and oversized wooden table, quickly became the heart of the home. It was where breakfast turned into lingering conversations and spontaneous family gatherings. The air always seemed to carry the comforting scent of coffee, fresh bread, and something warm from the oven, even if busy schedules left little time for elaborate meals. Upstairs, the bedrooms offered personal retreats. Our room centered around a wide, inviting bed that every morning became a playground for the twins. They'd tumble in with blankets, stuffed animals, and endless chatter. Their rooms reflected vibrant childhood fantasies. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, towering block cities sprawled across the floor, and walls displayed colorful drawings of imagined worlds. The basement, once intended as my office, quickly fell under the twins' control. They claimed it as their fortress, a space for secret missions, messy art projects, and makeshift forts built from blankets and chairs. My neatly organized desk now stood amid painted boxes, scattered toys, and the joyful chaos of childhood. The house held everything: our family, dreams, work, books, rare moments of quiet, and even rarer evenings spent just the two of us. It wasn't just a structure, but a living, breathing space that captured the essence of our lives. Every morning began with the soft creak of footsteps on wooden floors, and every night ended with whispered conversations in the twilight. Life here was vibrant and full. The twins, Leo and Olivia, infused the house with constant movement and energy. Leo, endlessly curious and bursting with adventure, could turn any corner into a new discovery. Olivia, more thoughtful and calculating, often found ways to use her charm to nudge Leo into doing her bidding. Their voices became the soundtrack of our mornings. Olivia's sharp scolding, "Leo, get off the kitchen table!" was inevitably met with his defiant retort, cookie in hand, "I'm not lying." Toys scattered across the living room became part of the decor, blending seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. Both twins were strikingly like Savannah. Expressive eyes, confident posture, and that signature raised eyebrow whenever they disagreed with me. Yet their emotional connection to me was undeniable. Leo mimicked my gestures and proudly declared he'd grow up to be just like Dad. Olivia, though quieter, always sought my reassurance when uncertainty crept in. I cherished every moment with them. Bike races around the yard, pillow fort battles, bedtime stories that stretched past sleep. Career ambitions and future plans still mattered, but they now revolved around these two little forces of nature who filled our home with purpose and joy. Yet, amid the joy, I couldn't ignore Savannah's occasional glances, fleeting, almost imperceptible moments that hinted at quiet jealousy toward the bond I shared with the children. She never voiced it, but once noticed, it became hard to overlook. Gerald Hayward, meanwhile, remained a constant, his presence subtle yet persistent. His name surfaced in casual conversations, holiday messages arrived at odd hours, and career opportunities for Savannah always seemed to come with his endorsement. He hovered in the background, never overt, but always there, like an uninvited guest lingering at the edge of every moment. Over time, it became clear he wasn't just her colleague. His attention extended beyond professionalism. Messages arrived late at night, justified by time zone differences. At corporate events, he lingered nearby, praising Savannah's achievements while offering veiled remarks that felt less like compliments and more like subtle claims. Savannah brushed it off as harmless, attributing his behavior to his love for theatrics while I bit my tongue, unwilling to spark a conflict that might jeopardize her career. Life pressed on, 2 decades passing in a blur of shared dreams, quiet routines, petty arguments, and reconciliations. I believed we'd weathered every storm, our marriage built on love, trust, and resilience. The house, the children, the careers, it all seemed like proof that we'd gotten it right. But all it took was one night for everything to unravel. The company threw a lavish party to celebrate Savannah's long-awaited promotion, the culmination of years of relentless effort. She was radiant, the center of attention in an elegant midnight blue gown, exuding the effortless confidence that had always defined her. Admiring glances followed her every move, and I stood by, proud to call her my wife. Yet, beneath the celebration, unease simmered. Gerald's attention lingered too long, his smiles edged with something more than friendly admiration. Colleagues exchanged knowing looks, their congratulations laced with an undercurrent I couldn't quite place. The room, vibrant and celebratory, felt oddly staged, as though everyone was in on a secret I had yet to uncover. Overwhelmed by the strange atmosphere, I stepped away for air, hoping a moment of solitude would clear my head. Instead, I stumbled upon a conversation that shattered everything I believed about my life. Voices drifted from around the corner, careless, mocking, and far too familiar. Gerald's name, Savannah's name, and casual remarks laced with disdain painted a picture I was wholly unprepared for. The promotion, the career success, even the children, it all, according to Gerald, traced back to carefully calculated choices. Savannah, he claimed, had always known what sacrifices were necessary to advance. Every opportunity, every achievement had come with compromises she'd willingly made. The final blow landed with chilling clarity, Gerald insinuating that the twins weren't just the product of my marriage, but of something far more deliberate. He spoke with the smug certainty of someone who believed he'd won a game his opponent didn't even know he was playing. The world tilted, my chest tightened, breath shallow as the fragments of my carefully built life collapsed under the weight of betrayal. What had once felt solid, marriage, family, trust, now seemed like an illusion, fragile and irreparably broken. The moment the truth hit, I stood frozen in a crowded hall, drowning in the noise of celebration. People laughed, glasses clinked, and Savannah stood at the center of it all, beaming, radiant, victorious. She looked like someone who had conquered the world while I stood there, broken and invisible. Gerald leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and she laughed without hesitation. That laughter echoed in my head long after I turned and walked out, unable to face the lie any longer. I'd never been one for revenge, but humiliation and betrayal twisted inside me, hardening into something cold and calculating. Screaming wouldn't change anything. I needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable evidence to confront her with the truth she'd hidden for 2 decades. I ordered discrete cameras and installed them throughout the house and her office, placing them where her professional life might blur into something far more personal. I didn't know how deep the betrayal ran, but even the smallest confirmation would shatter the facade she'd built. DNA tests came next. I sent in samples, mine and the children's, through an anonymous service. It was a desperate attempt to cling to one last hope, that at the very least, Leo and Olivia were truly mine. The wait for the results was agonizing, each day stretching longer under the weight of suspicion. The night before a scheduled business trip, I sat across from Savannah at dinner, watching her with new eyes. She moved through the familiar motions, smiling, chatting, completely unaware that the world she'd constructed was about to collapse. I probed carefully, asking subtle questions about choices and regrets, searching for even a flicker of guilt. There was none. Just polished lies delivered with practiced ease. The woman I had trusted for 20 years sat there, calm and composed, while I silently prepared to dismantle the life we'd built together. The next morning, I left for my trip, kissed her cheek as usual, and walked out the door, knowing I'd return to a different reality. The days away blurred into a gray haze of meetings and dinners, my mind fixed on the house I'd wired with cameras, the secrets they might capture, and the envelope of DNA results waiting for me back home. Late at night, back in my office, I finally faced the truth. The sealed envelope sat beside my laptop, unopened but radiating finality. My hand hovered over it. But first, I pressed play on the footage. The screen flickered to life, and there she was, Savannah, standing in our bedroom, wearing the same dress from the day I left. She laughed into her phone, carefree and relaxed, untouched by doubt. Then Gerald entered. He moved confidently like he belonged there, and the sight hit me like a punch to the gut. Did he have a key? Had he always? She tossed her phone aside and stepped toward him. He touched her face, and she leaned into his hand without hesitation. There was no awkwardness, no guilt, just the smooth, practiced rhythm of familiarity. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. It was routine, a parallel life running alongside mine, hidden behind the illusion of family happiness. I watched until the end, forcing myself to witness every second. No blinking, no turning away, no mercy for my own breaking heart. When the video stopped, I closed the laptop, hollowed out by a betrayal so deep it left nothing but emptiness. There was no rage, no tears, only cold understanding. I was never more than a convenience, background noise in the life she truly lived. Finally, I reached for the envelope, tore it open, and read the results. The last shred of hope dissolved in an instant. I had everything I needed. The truth, undeniable and unforgiving, lay before me. There was no going back. The weeks leading up to our 25th wedding anniversary were spent in meticulous preparation. This wasn't just about celebration, it was about closure. Every detail was planned with surgical precision, emotions replaced by cold calculation. Invitations were sent, catering booked from the city's finest restaurant, and the menu curated to reflect the illusion of a perfect life. Legal documents were finalized, the projector installed, and evidence organized into an airtight presentation. Savannah, consumed by work, left the event planning to me, unaware that the celebration she eagerly anticipated would unravel everything she held dear. Our children, Leo and Olivia, arrived the day before. Leo, now tall and composed, carried himself with quiet confidence, while Olivia, sharp-eyed and poised, moved with the same grace as her mother, but with a resilience unmistakably mine. Dinner that night felt surreal. They spoke of school, future plans, and internships, Leo aiming for a grant-winning project, Olivia eyeing a career with the State Department or UN. I listened, smiled, and wondered if they'd ever understand why I was about to dismantle everything they believed was secure. The night of the anniversary, the mansion radiated opulence. Luxury cars lined the driveway, and guests, polished, smiling, and draped in designer attire, floated through candlelit rooms adorned with white lilies and golden accents. A towering wedding cake, studded with edible pearls, sat as the centerpiece, symbolizing the facade of an unbreakable union. Savannah was breathtaking, a vision in flowing white silk that clung to her figure with effortless elegance. Diamonds shimmered at her ears, and her hair, styled in soft waves, framed a face glowing with confidence. She moved through the crowd like royalty, laughter melodic and charm perfectly calibrated. This was her stage, and she owned it. Guests whispered, speculating about a vow renewal. Even a priest stood quietly in the corner, further fueling the illusion. Conversations swirled. Business deals, fashion trends, gossip about failed marriages and secret affairs. The air, thick with expensive perfume, and the savory scent of gourmet appetizers, buzzed with the energy of success and pretense. Gerald, as always, navigated the room like its true host. He laughed easily, commanded attention effortlessly, and at one point drew Leo and Olivia aside. His questions about their studies and future plans were casual but deliberate, planting seeds about potential roles in his prestigious company. It wasn't an offer, just a suggestion, a reminder that opportunities could stay within the family. Watching from across the room, I felt the last thread of restraint snap. The room had reached its peak, voices blending into background noise as I stepped forward, glass in hand. A gentle tap of silver against crystal silenced the crowd, eyes turning toward me in anticipation. Savannah's smile widened, eyes sparkling with excitement. She was certain this moment would crown her evening, a grand romantic declaration marking our silver milestone. She stood poised, radiant under the chandeliers, the embodiment of elegance and control. But the night wasn't hers. It was mine. And it was time for the curtain to fall. I stood beside Savannah, watching her bask in the attention she so adored. The chandeliers above cast a golden glow, highlighting her carefully curated elegance. The flawless dress, the radiant smile, the practiced charm. She lived for moments like this, thriving under the weight of admiration, completely unaware of the storm about to break. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter weaving through the air like smoke. I let it wash over me, detached, my mind focused on the script I'd written for the evening. Every detail had been considered, every moment calculated. This wasn't just another anniversary celebration. It was closure. I raised my glass, the crystal catching the light, and called for attention. My voice, steady and sure, silenced the chatter. Eyes turned toward us, expectant and oblivious. Savannah stood tall beside me, smiling at the crowd, completely unaware of what lay ahead. "Tonight is special," I began, my gaze sweeping the room. "Not just because we celebrate 25 years together, but because milestones like this deserve reflection and sometimes revelation." There was a flicker of curiosity in the crowd, but Savannah only nodded, her smile unwavering. She loved this. The center stage, the applause, the illusion of perfection. She had no idea how fragile that illusion was. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small velvet case. Simple, elegant, unassuming. I held it out to her, watching the excitement light up her eyes as she took it. Her fingers brushed the surface, lingering as she imagined the treasure inside. Jewelry, undoubtedly. Something extravagant, rare, worthy of display. She opened the lid, and the light in her eyes died instantly. The tiny coffin nestled within was perfection, smooth, polished, and cold. A fitting symbol. Her brows knit together, confusion flashing into unease as she glanced at me, searching for reassurance. None came. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I let it linger, savoring the weight of the moment before speaking. My voice was calm, deliberate. "It's a coffin," I said, holding her gaze. "For my love for you." The words fell like a stone into still water, rippling through the crowd. A stifled laugh escaped someone near the back, nervous and short-lived. The rest stood frozen, glancing between us, struggling to decipher if this was some elaborate joke. It wasn't. Without missing a beat, I signaled the lights. The chandeliers dimmed, shadows creeping along the walls. Whispers rose, then died as the projector hummed to life behind them. The screen flickered once, twice, before settling into sharp focus. A bedroom. Our bedroom. Recognition hit the room like a slap. Silk sheets rumpled in disarray, bodies entwined in a scene far removed from the pretense of marital bliss. Savannah, for once, was speechless. Her face, so practiced in masking emotions, shattered into pale horror. And there he was, Gerald. A name someone muttered, slicing through the thick silence like a knife. The crowd recoiled, some gasping, others turning away, unable to watch the brutal unveiling of betrayal. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than anything I could say. Savannah stood rooted, lips parted, eyes wide, the coffin still clutched in her trembling hand. This wasn't revenge. It was clarity. The end of an illusion too long maintained. And as the guests stumbled for excuses to leave, I remained still, watching the wreckage of a carefully curated life collapse around her. Some guests stood frozen, as though caught in a trance, their eyes locked on the screen while the weight of realization crashed down. Nervous coughs broke the silence, and men tugged at their ties, grasping for a shred of composure. What had once been an evening of celebration now felt like a stage collapsing beneath its performers. The illusion of a perfect marriage, 2 decades and more of carefully curated appearances, shattered in an instant, exposing the hollow shell beneath. Years of meticulously upheld appearances crumbled, leaving nothing but raw, undeniable truth. Savannah stood like a statue, drained of color, her face an unreadable mask. The usual poise she wielded with such grace now betrayed her, lips trembling, unable to form words. It was as though time itself had abandoned her, leaving her stranded in a reality she couldn't manipulate. Gerald, ever the picture of smug confidence, seemed equally paralyzed. The self-assured grin he'd worn all evening faded, replaced by a stiff, expressionless mask. He set his glass down, the movement too precise, as if clinging to routine might restore control. But it was clear. He hadn't expected this. Not here. Not like this. The men who had stood by his side, laughing at half-hearted jokes just moments before, slowly backed away. They distanced themselves with practiced ease, like survivors fleeing a sinking ship. Cowards, I thought, but predictable ones. I remained rooted, the eye of the storm, untouched by the chaos I had unleashed. This moment, years in the making, was no accident. Every word, every gesture had been part of a performance I hadn't known I was part of, until now. But the script was mine at last, and I was no longer the fool. I was the director, the architect of their downfall. I stepped forward, the room closing in like a vice. Even the house itself seemed to hold its breath, walls pressing inward as though anticipating collapse. My gaze met Savannah's, but the woman I had loved, trusted, built a life with, she was gone. In her place stood a stranger, cold and calculating. The truth I had refused to see for far too long reflected in her hollow stare. The video flickered on, but the sounds dulled, like voices submerged beneath water. Reality shrank, blurring the edges of the crowd, muting the frantic whispers and sharp intakes of breath. In that suffocating silence, only 3 figures remained: Savannah, Gerald, and me. No more lies, no more pretense, only truth, laid bare for all to see. 25 years, I said, my voice steady, stripped of warmth. Each word landed like a hammer blow. A quarter of a century. The crowd held its breath. No glasses clinked. No murmurs stirred the silence. Time itself seemed to stall. We built a home, a family. We raised children. I stood by you, loved you, protected you, believed we were one. I paused, letting the weight of those years settle between us like dust after a collapse. Savannah didn't move, couldn't. Her carefully composed mask had cracked, revealing nothing but fragile emptiness. The flush of triumph that had made her radiant earlier had drained away, leaving her pale and exposed. Her fingers tightened around the velvet case as though clinging to it might rewind the clock, as if shutting that tiny coffin could bury the truth and restore the comforting lie. But once truth emerges, it refuses to be buried again. I had made sure of that. You said our love was real, I continued, taking another step forward. The calm in my voice cut deeper than any shout could. It wasn't anger, it was certainty, and that made it unforgivable. You laughed with me, promised we were a team, swore we could survive anything together. Savannah swallowed hard, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. But in reality, I said, my gaze flicking toward Gerald, you were with him all along. The man, once so smug, now stood like prey cornered by a predator. The color drained from his face, jaw tightening as panic flickered in his eyes. He'd played his part well, until now. I held Savannah's gaze. The last remnants of pain burned away, leaving only cold resolve. You chose ambition, comfort, convenience, but you never chose honesty. In that moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The music, the lights, the gawking guests. Nothing remained but the wreckage of trust and the woman who had taken it for granted. This night, once set to crown her triumph, now marked her descent into irrelevance. I felt it. The final thread binding our lives together snapping, leaving behind an emptiness that couldn't be filled. An emptiness I no longer wished to fill. The crowd hesitated, uncertain whether to watch or turn away. Someone discreetly raised a phone, recording history in the making. A woman in the corner glanced aside, pretending not to witness the downfall unraveling before her. A nervous laugh escaped from somewhere, quickly stifled by an urgent tug on the sleeve. Savannah opened her mouth, but I cut her off before she could utter a single excuse. "Spare me," I said, my tone flat. "There's nothing left to explain. I've already taken care of everything." From my jacket pocket, I pulled an envelope. The paper rustled softly, but my hand remained steady, as though sealing the final chapter of a book, long overdue for its end. Divorce papers. I extended the envelope, watching her face contort as reality finally broke through her denial. Her hand reached for it, trembling, but I was already turning away. The last thread snapped, the connection severed, but I wasn't finished. I turned to Gerald, whose defiance had drained into a hollow bravado. A second envelope was already in my hand, heavier with consequence. "And for you," I said, voice sharp as a knife, "a lawsuit, exploitation, manipulation under the guise of generosity." The words landed like sharp bursts, each syllable precise and deliberate. "You've leveraged your influence long enough, turning women into pawns, playing the benefactor while pulling their strings. Your employers will find the evidence enlightening, I'm sure." Gerald paled. His jaw clenched so tightly the veins along his temple stood out, but the fire in his eyes had been doused by pure, unfiltered fear. He didn't argue. He understood. He'd already lost. And I had already moved on, leaving them drowning in the wreckage they had built. The room fell into a suffocating silence, thick and unyielding. It was as if the air itself recoiled from Gerald, as though standing too close might stain one's reputation. People edged away without a word. Some pretended not to see him. Others stared, their faces twisted in open disgust, like they'd just witnessed a predator stripped of its camouflage. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. I turned to Savannah. She stood there, frozen, her usual poise shattered. For years she had mastered the art of composure, but now, stripped of control, she looked more like a statue than the vibrant woman I once loved. "This," I said quietly, each word deliberate, "is a DNA test." My voice cut through the silence, sharper than any shout. I placed the final envelope on the table in front of her. For a moment, nothing moved. Then I watched the fear distort her face, twisting her features into something almost unrecognizable. "Official proof," I continued, not breaking eye contact, "that Leo and Olivia are my children, not his, mine." Savannah staggered, the weight of those words knocking the breath from her lungs. Gerald stiffened, his face draining of color. Somewhere in the crowd, someone let out a low whistle, the sound sharp against the oppressive quiet. I stepped back and surveyed the room. The faces I saw weren't unfamiliar, people I'd once laughed with, shared dinners with, trusted. Now, they couldn't meet my gaze. They shifted uncomfortably, pretending they hadn't known, pretending they hadn't turned a blind eye while lies piled up like dust in the corners of my life. "Let's toast to the truth," I said, raising my glass. No one moved. No one drank. The divorce was swift, clean. I had no interest in drawn-out arguments or messy settlements. I signed the papers without hesitation, ensuring Savannah walked away with the bare minimum. No house, no shared assets, no claim to the children she had betrayed. The legal system, cold and methodical, did its work like a scalpel slicing away diseased tissue. Precise, unforgiving. She left the house with a single suitcase. Everything else, gone. Without the financial cushion she'd grown so comfortable with, her accounts bled dry faster than she'd anticipated. She tried to rebuild, to find work, but the scandal followed her like a shadow. Whispers echoed through business circles and doors quietly closed. No one wanted to risk their reputation by standing beside hers. But I knew the harshest blow wasn't professional. It was personal. Leo and Olivia erased her from their lives as thoroughly as I had. They didn't answer her calls, didn't open the door, didn't offer even the pretense of forgiveness. Her messages piled up, unread and unanswered, until eventually she stopped trying. Once, fate twisted the knife deeper. I saw it happen, a chance encounter on a busy street. Savannah spotted Leo outside a cafe, laughing with friends. For a split second, he froze, recognition flashing across his face. But instead of acknowledgement, he turned away. No hesitation, no glance back, just gone. And Gerald? He fared no better. Stripped of his position, his influence evaporated overnight. The board fired him without ceremony, and the investigations that followed unearthed more than just poor judgment. Fraud, misconduct, corruption. He tried to salvage what little dignity he had left, but the city had already turned its back. His name, once synonymous with power, became a cautionary tale whispered with contempt. Savannah found herself exiled, socially, professionally, personally. The friends she once entertained in lavish dining rooms stopped returning her calls. Acquaintances, once eager to be seen with her, now crossed the street to avoid eye contact. She had become an outcast in the world she once ruled. And me? I moved on. Or at least, I tried to. The penthouse overlooking Boston became my sanctuary. From up there, the city unfolded like a living map, neon lights flickering against wet asphalt, car horns blending into the hum of late-night traffic. People hurried along the sidewalks below, caught in their own lives, unaware of the man watching from above. I had everything I'd once dreamed of: financial independence, a prestigious consulting career, a home that echoed with quiet instead of conflict. But satisfaction never came. Peace, yes, but a cold, sterile peace, like an empty stage after the final curtain falls. I'd won, but victory tasted hollow. Memories clung to me, no matter how far I tried to move forward. I saw betrayal in every smile, heard deception in the softest words. Trust, once given freely, now felt like a fool's currency. I learned to read between the lines, the flicker of hesitation, the tightness in a voice, the glance that lingered a second too long. These spoke louder than promises ever could. I tried more than once to let someone new into my life, but warmth felt like a trap. Even the most sincere gestures seemed rehearsed. I wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, I found solitude almost comforting. What unsettled me was the silence, the heavy, relentless quiet that settled in after the chaos faded. One night, whiskey in hand, I caught my reflection in the window. The man staring back was a stranger. Gone was the dreamer who once believed in family, in love, in shared futures. This version of Jack was sharper, colder, wiser perhaps, but devoid of the warmth that once defined him. I'd gained clarity, but at the cost of something softer, something essential. And somewhere, forgotten by time and circumstance, an old metal mailbox stood weathered and worn. Once painted bright blue, the color had long since faded, peeling under years of sun and rain. The door creaked on rusty hinges, releasing the faint scent of damp paper and dust every time it opened. Inside, a stack of letters lay undisturbed. The envelopes, frayed and fragile, told their own story. Some barely held together by brittle glue, others torn open in moments of frantic emotion. A few remained sealed, untouched and unresolved. The creases and scribbled-out lines revealed the turmoil of their authors, words written, regretted, rewritten, and abandoned. No one had claimed them for months, maybe longer. They sat there still, like ghosts of confessions too painful to send, slowly decaying alongside the memories they carried, much like the past itself, left behind but never truly gone. The tiny kitchen felt colder than usual. Savannah sat hunched over the chipped table in her cramped rented apartment, the weak warmth from an old radiator barely reaching her feet. The only light came from a flickering lamp on the counter, casting long, tired shadows across the peeling walls. Silence pressed down like a weight, thick and stifling, as though the room itself held its breath. Her phone lay face up beside an empty mug, stained with remnants of yesterday's tea. The screen, dull and lifeless, offered no notifications, no calls, no messages, nothing. Savannah had long lost count of how many times she'd pressed redial, listened to the hollow ring, and been met with the same detached voice of Jack's answering machine. Each unanswered call chipped away at her resolve, but she couldn't stop herself. Desperation had become a habit. When calling failed to soothe the ache, she turned to writing. Letters had become her ritual, her penance. Each week she sat at that worn table, surrounded by the faded remnants of a life she no longer recognized, and poured herself onto paper. There, under the dim light, she tried to articulate the words she could never say aloud. The first drafts were always short, hesitant, as though testing the waters of her own regret. A few stilted lines, awkward and unsure, trying to capture what her heart struggled to express. But once the dam broke, her emotions flooded the page. Page after page of confessional monologues spilled out, raw, unfiltered, drenched in remorse. She wrote about everything, about the dreams she had chased and the ones she had shattered in the process, about the future she and Jack had once imagined together, a future she had destroyed with her own hands. She confessed how ambition had blinded her, how she'd mistaken fleeting success for fulfillment, ignoring the quiet, steadfast love that had been her greatest treasure. Savannah revisited the moments when she could have changed course, when fate had given her every chance to turn back. But each time, She had chosen the wrong path, stubbornly marching toward her own ruin. It was only after losing everything that she understood the truth. She hadn't just betrayed Jack. She had betrayed herself, hiding behind achievements that now felt hollow and meaningless. Every letter was a plea for forgiveness, written like a prayer, repeated until the words lost their shape. Over and over, she scribbled her apologies, as if sheer repetition could make them more believable. She knew Jack might never read them. Perhaps he tossed them aside, unopened. Maybe they ended up in the trash, discarded without a glance. But she kept writing, convinced that, if nothing else, confessing her failures on paper might grant her a sliver of peace. Sometimes, against her better judgment, Savannah caught herself hoping that one day her phone would buzz with an unfamiliar number or light up with a message, angry, resentful, anything but silent. Even fury would be easier to bear than indifference. But the screen stayed dark. The voicemail remained empty. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks dissolved into months. The silence stretched on, relentless and unforgiving. Her mailbox, however, told a different story. It overflowed with envelopes, letters scrawled on whatever paper she could find. Some were written on torn notebook pages, others on once elegant stationery she had saved from better days. Occasionally, she chose embossed paper, the kind they used to write love notes and tuck into each other's bags as surprises. But even those letters, once symbols of affection, now sat faded and stained, victims of time and neglect. Savannah wrote through trembling hands, through the ache of cold seeping into her bones, through tears that blurred the ink into illegible smudges. Each crumpled draft reminded her of the countless mistakes she had made, and each carefully sealed envelope became a monument to regret. She often wondered what might have happened if she could turn back time, back to the moment everything fell apart. But no amount of longing could undo the choices already carved into the past. Hope, once persistent, had long since flickered out. Savannah no longer believed Jack would read her words, let alone respond. She had resigned herself to the silence, understanding it as the final consequence of her betrayal. The letters had transformed into a private dialogue with herself, an endless cycle of confession and self-recrimination. Each envelope was less an attempt to reach Jack, and more a desperate effort to bridge the chasm she had dug between them. Each tear-stained page stood as silent proof of how deep that chasm had grown. Still, she couldn't stop. Writing had become her only tether to the past, a painful but necessary lifeline. It was as though by reliving her guilt on paper, she might eventually dull the sting of memory. Yet every letter only sharpened the ache, forcing her to confront the permanence of her loss. The mailbox, dusty and forgotten, continued to fill, a silent testament to her persistence. The envelopes piled up, untouched and unanswered, like gravestones for a life that could never be reclaimed. Savannah came to understand a bitter truth. Some actions have consequences that echo forever, and no amount of repentance can erase them. Sometimes, no matter how fervent the prayer, the answer never comes. And sometimes, forgiveness is just an empty word when the one you beg it from no longer cares to listen.